Hey guys, Jeremy Wallace here, Microsoft Certified Azure Solutions Architect and Senior Cloud Infrastructure Engineer for Safari Micro. Today we're going to be talking about how to calculate costs for Azure Site Recovery. If you're not familiar with Azure Site Recovery, you can use it to protect your production workloads for a disaster recovery scenario where you want to replicate maybe your production environment into Azure as a DR location or from one Azure region to another region. And in the event of an outage, you can fail over to that DR location, work with your applications and virtual machines there, actually replicate it back to the original source, and then one time you can fail back over to that production environment. But there are costs associated with using ASR, and so why don't we dive in and take a look at how to calculate those. So first things first, if you're not familiar with the Azure pricing calculator, it is your best friend when it comes to estimating costs inside Azure. Let's dive right in here. First, we're going to search for Azure Site Recovery. And so if I'm if I'm using Azure Site Recovery, I need to pick a region that I want to replicate to. In my case, I'm going to select West US 3 here because that's in Arizona where I am. So I'm recovering to West US 3, and then I need to pick the location exactly if the recovery endpoint is a customer-owned site or Azure. In this scenario, let's just say I'm using ASR to protect an on-premise workload that I want to go into Azure. So I want to be able to fail over to Azure. So I'm going to pick recover to Azure. Let's just say it's a single server for simplicity's sake. So I'm protecting one server. You can see there's a $25 cost associated for protecting that one instance. Am I done? Not exactly. So when you're using ASR to protect your workloads, in the virtual machine aspect, really in any aspect, you're going to have to worry about the storage costs that are involved. So for virtual machines specifically, you're going to have to deal with a managed virtual disk cost in your replicated region. So if I'm protecting one server here, then any disks that are attached to that server instance is what I need to factor in to my ASR replication costs. So let's search for disks, manage disks. So say this server has a C drive on it, so I'm going to say local disk C, C, and pick my region, West US 3. Always important to pick your region because there are different costs associated with different regions. Tier, premium SSD. This is going to be my local disk that the operating system's running on. Recommend premium SSD there. Local redundancy, I'm fine with keeping there. Say my OS disk is 128 gigs. Single disk there. So I have my local C drive considered here. Now I'm going to add another one for a data disk, which is a typical setup that we have seen with server environments. So data disk, data disk. Let's say this is D. I'm going to, same thing, pick my region, West US 3, premium SSD, local redundancy is fine, and then this one I'm going to pick 2 terabytes, because that's a common scenario that we see, for especially if you're maybe hosting a database on it or a file share, so big secondary data disk. All right, so now I have my local disk, my data disk, and my replication instance. So we can see here that my total estimated monthly cost is $278.44 for the West US 3 region. Now, because in this scenario, I am replicating from on-premise into Azure, that is an ingress direction, so I'm bringing data into Azure and not out of the region, not egress. There is a free ingestion there, so there's no cost for bringing the data into Azure. What if I wanted to, say I had a production workload in Azure already, and I wanted to use ASR to replicate that to another region? So say my production workload is in East US 3, or East US, and I want to replicated over to West US 3 here. So the data is going out of one Azure region to this Azure region. So now I do have egress to consider because it is an outbound charge. So we do have to factor that into our flow. So ASR compression compresses about 60% or compresses at a rate of about 60%. So when you're calculating that as a bandwidth cost, as data that's flowing egress out of the environment, you only need to take about 40% of the total amount of data in there. So if I pull up a calculator here and say I have 2 terabytes on 100 gigabytes, so I'm saying, let's just say 2100 for ease sake, and I'm taking 40% of that, that's 840. So now I'm going to go to my Azure calculator, and I'm going to add bandwidth into my estimation. So bandwidth, all right, so now I'm doing inter-region data transfer from East US to West US 3. And my calculator said 840. So 840 gigabytes. So we're looking at about $41 a month in data transfer charges replicating from that East US region into West US 3. So those are the primary costs that you have to be concerned about when calculating for Azure Site Recovery. Obviously, if you do a test failover or an actual failover and you're running the virtual machines that are replicated on the other end, then you have the virtual machine cost of actually running those. But just in a protected state, when you're not actually failed over, you're not doing a test failover, you only have to worry about the storage charges and the actual per instance charge of using ASR. So that was quick in a nutshell. Those are the costs that you have to consider. Do follow me for more Azure videos. This is Jeremy Wells. Follow me on LinkedIn as well. And then subscribe to our Cloud Bros channel if you have not already.